Folks, I'm Pamela Young and this is Thrive 2030 brought to you by growthcurv, and today it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Lyndal Hugo, who is the founder and former CEO of Orlar, which is a Australian Vietnamese company that specialises in producing zero pollution and zero chemical residue food for people in the emerging economies. Hello Lyndal, how are you today?
I'm great, thanks Pamela, and thank you for the introduction and for the invitation today.
Well, it's a great pleasure to talk to an entrepreneur who started her career after doing a PhD in the fate and transport of pesticides in the environment and food supply chains, which is a very interesting notion. And then you spent 15 years advising government agencies on climate change and greenhouse gases as an environmental accountant, a term that I'm not familiar with, so you might have to help us out there to understand what that role was. But I'm most interested in how do you give up that 15-year career and come to Vietnam, 5, 6, 7 years ago to set up your own company to produce food, and the journey that you've taken, and you are now award-winning business with global recognition, and I'm so thrilled to have this opportunity to hear your story. So could we start, Lyndal, with how did you make the decision to leave that career and come to Vietnam and start this business, this manufacturing food production business, with this very high ambition of producing, producing low residue.
Zero residue, zero pollution food.
Yes, zero residue, zero pollution food. It's a big ambition.
So, the first thing is really, I use the term environmental accounting frequently. Yes. Because a lot of people understand cash accounting, debits and credits, and the environment is just a very similar place where pluses and minuses happen all the time.
Yes.
And in particular with greenhouse gas emissions or greenhouse gas sequestration, for example.
Yeah.
So I'd worked in that area for about 15 years, and I was interestingly becoming a bit disillusioned with the place where the debate was going. And it really was just a debate, and there was not much happening. And very sadly, back in my consulting days, I was actually already advising very large companies and government agencies, etc., that climate change mitigation, we were already approaching a runaway situation. So we had to be looking at adaptation. So what that meant, I just really wanted to do something to make a difference. So it was a crazy decision to leave that kind of corporate world, but and to come to Vietnam, which is an emerging economy and very much a developing. Oh wow!
How did you choose Vietnam? Why Vietnam?
We'd been to Vietnam 10 years prior, 7 years to us prior to arriving, and we loved Vietnam. Knew as well here in Southeast Asia, looking at my background with pesticide residues in the environment and the food chain, Southeast Asia has one of the biggest problems with chemical contaminants. Okay. And the reason is because it's either been the manufacturing facility for the world for the last 50 years, or there's widespread use of chemicals that aren't really regulated, workforce that aren't aware of the issues. You've got small landholder plots, massive pest issues. You've got all of these things which collide.
Wow. To
mean that the fastest growing part of the world is actually, unfortunately, incredibly contaminated.
So you had a challenge, it seems.
Well, the challenge, pretty much anybody can actually make clean food here, but nobody, and it involves massive amounts of energy and indoor agriculture and crazy technology. But the point is, what we did is actually far more than just, I guess, zero emissions and zero chemical residues. We aim to do it for $1 per kilogram. And so that's the big differentiator.
You've got a nice big hurdle there.
It was sort of impossible before we got here. And I'm still amazed that we can do it, but, and we've still got lots of things that we're still working through as every business, but we're very, very well known in Vietnam and Southeast Asia now for what we do.
Yes. I'm going to join you and share with people watching this beautiful scene of your business so that they can get a sense. Generally, I put up a cityscape of your city, but you have got such a beautiful internal environment here for the growing of your produce. And I think it's really important for people to understand you came with nothing and you set up a business with these high ambitions and to operate in this very challenging environment. And look how beautiful it is. Would you like to explain a little bit about your business?
Okay, so as I explained, or as I discussed previously, anybody can come to a highly contaminated place or, and create food at $40 to $50 a kilogram. Mm-hmm. There's lots of indoor agriculture at the moment, lots of lights, lots of technology, lots of energy, lots of disposable, landfill, single-use plastics. There's still a massive impact on the environment. And that all gets produced at $40 to $50 a kilogram. This is an emerging economy. You have to produce at $1 to $4 a kilogram to be scalable. So every single thing about that technology is zero pollution and as the least amount of energy use possible, with concurrently the highest intensity of production. That has taken us 5 years to really work through. And we did come here with basically nothing, but I would say, there's now something like 5,000 grow cycles that have been through our technology, and we've just built it bit by bit by bit. And we had, friends and family who were true believers. There were times when we literally had not enough money in the bank to fly home to Australia, and people have actually asked, why didn't you just leave when things were so hard? And we literally did not have enough money back then for a $300 Jetstar flight back to Australia. Yeah. So what you're looking at there, all of that technology, we had houses in Australia, these were our assets. We sold it all to put into this business. Mm-hmm. So, but now where we are, it's a pretty incredible story.
Yes, it is an incredible story. So what is happening here in this warehouse?
Okay, so what's happening here is like the technology, very, very little energy used. In the middle of those white pods, there is a specific rock, and that rock is at different sizes, and that allows the water and the nutrients to fill down from the top. We fill that with microbes, microbiology, and then we plant the plants in the side in particular mix. And we don't recycle water. We don't use any lights. We rely on natural light. And yeah, it makes the plants resistant to pests and diseases and all sorts of issues which plague everybody else. Yes. But basically it's just, the technology is so stable and it's so resilient and it's so passive that we can bring it into a developing economy and produce at $1 to $4 a kilogram, and at the same time be on the in the top 200 restaurants in Vietnam. So we've got every middle class supermarket, and we have at least the top 200 restaurants in Vietnam.
Fantastic.
So
inside those white channels, columns that you have there, you said they were filled with rocks. So you're not using soil?
No.
We would imagine.
No, not at all. Not at all. And so what happens is that rock is an organic, it says it's organic certified Australian kind of material that we developed. And normally what would happen as you grow plants is that, especially if you tried to grow them like that, you would have to run the water around, right? So the water gets to the bottom, you drain it out, and then you lift it back to the top.
Yes.
We don't do any of that. So we're very, very energy efficient because we're not lifting water all of the time.
Right.
Big reason why nobody would ever have done this in the past is because they would think that, and it's valid, that if you had a static rock or soil inside there, you would end up with disease. Okay, that disease would mean that you would have to empty that pot out all of the time, clean it, and then put it back.
Right.
In 5,000 growth cycles, we've never had disease, and that's probably the biggest breakthrough of this technology. People actually just can't comprehend that. No. Professionals in horticulture. But what that does then is inside that pod with that rock. We can control the temperature so effectively that we can grow in areas that nobody else can grow. So we can take lettuce plants or strawberries and grow them out of the traditional areas where only those climates are.
So
it's just incredible.
No pesticide is used at all.
We do use some natural and even some organic chemicals. And every now and then we have to use on some seedlings. If infestation's really bad, sometimes we might use some organic kind of pesticides, but anything like you would see in this country.
It's fascinating. I understand that you recently won some awards for your vertical farming innovations. Can you just explain to us what that award was about and what it was for? I think so.
Last year,
government and
we've won a number of awards for the technology. Last year, we were the European Chamber of Commerce here. We won an award for our environmental credentials. That's really important to us because the other companies that were nominated there are large publicly listed companies, and they have to comply with the strictest pollution requirements of Europe, even if they come to Vietnam.
Yes. So
we were up against some giants of European business, and we won that award. And then we've won some awards through, the Australian government and also the Americans, actually, for the sustainability and environmental credentials. And on Saturday night, the team won for the Australian Chamber of Commerce. We won Environmental and Social Business of the Year, and then I was incredibly lucky to have won Australian Businesswoman of the Year as well.
Wow, did you? Congratulations. That's incredible. Well done.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy.
You kept that quiet.
I've built the business with a lot of help from a lot of people, but it's totally a team award.
Yeah.
It's just a team award.
That's very generous of you, very gracious.
No, that's the truth.
You said at the start that you wanted to make a difference. Can you describe, because I mean, you're an entrepreneur who has done something really amazing. You've left a safe, cushy number in Australia to come to Vietnam and establish this business, which is now award-winning, and your products are in the top 200 restaurants of Vietnam. People are watching you and following you and looking to you for guidance. So it's really important for entrepreneurs and people who are hoping to be entrepreneurs to hear from others. What is it that drives you? You said you wanted to make a difference. Can you just describe what that is? And are you there yet? Or are you still on the journey?
We've made a massive difference to the local food that's available. And so I give this example all the time that, in a advancing or, an emerging economy like Vietnam, what happens is that as the GDP rises, unfortunately, the amount of imported food increases.
Yeah.
That imported food, if it's fresh food like lettuce, strawberries, etc., that always comes in air freight. That's massive greenhouse gas emissions.
Uh-huh.
Before Orla started, one of the local supermarkets here, and it's you'd go into the fresh veggie shelf, and the organic section was this big, and it was all filled with air freighted product. Now you go into that supermarket, and that shelf is that much Orla. That's local production.
Uh-huh.
And there's that much imported. So we're making clean food really, really, really accessible. And as an example, we're 10% of the price of imported food product. And so what that does, it's not just the fact then that you've got this clean food that's so accessible to the local population. And unfortunately, the rate of pesticide-induced cancers in Southeast Asia, and in particular in Vietnam, is, it's unbearably high, okay? So we're not just making a difference to the diets of people, and we're only the smallest percentage at the moment. We've got these massive growth potential. But the most important thing for me as a pesticide chemist was that when I started the business was that I never wanted to have any of our people go home and pick up a child after a day at work at Orla, and the first thing that they did was pick up that child, put it on their chest, and all that the child got was then a lung full of pesticide residue. So we're creating massive clean jobs here, and I'm so proud of the fact that that's never happened at Orla, and it never ever will.
Fantastic.
And it's the kind of thing that now, you know, cultural change and trust takes a long time, but we're now an employer of choice in Vietnam and in the area in which we operate, simply because, you know, it's real. It's real. These stories of, we've got one lady who came up to me at a Christmas party, and she said that she used to work at a farm, and every night she'd go home and she couldn't breathe because the chemicals are sprayed every single day.
Yes.
And there's no protection equipment or whatever. So she was so happy she'd never had an issue with her health since she started working at Orla.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot put that's just the most incredible thing, to be affecting what's happening up there for our employees, what's happening to the population who we sell food into, and to the fact that we're providing food that the top 200 chefs have normally had to import, and also that everybody else has normally had to import. So we're making pretty significant change.
Absolutely. Those top 200 chefs must be extremely happy to have an award-winning business like yours that is producing it at a much lower cost than imported foods. They must be doing some amazing cooking.
Well, they're amazing. They're amazing well before Orla came, but they're very, very grateful. And we have chefs here who when you talk about award-winning, the top two, restaurants in Vietnam who are, they're the only two last year that were in Asia's top 50 restaurants, and they're both massive, massive users of all our product.
Beautiful.
And it's just a lovely story.
Yes. You are in the Mekong Delta.
Yes.
In that area. Can you just tell us a little bit about the challenges for producers in the Mekong Delta, and how the climate change changes that we've been facing have impacted your sector?
Okay, so the Mekong Delta is one of the, it's Southeast Asia, or the world's rice bowl, basically.
Yeah.
The Mekong Delta is the Vietnamese part of the Mekong Delta, because it comes from China, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, and into the Vietnamese portion of the Mekong Delta. And in the world, the three most affected regions with climate change are the Vietnamese portion of the Mekong Delta, Myanmar, and Bangladesh. Mm-hmm. They're very low-lying areas where sea level rises will cause massive issues. And at the moment in the Mekong Delta, we already have, during summer, and we already have salt intrusion of up to 70 kilometres. So that water going back into the Mekong Delta for 70 kilometres is full of salt and can't be used for growing rice. Mm-hmm. Rice is the main crop in that area. And so it's predicted that there will be 10 million people displaced out of the Mekong Delta. Whether that's internal or external migration, that's a catastrophe on any scale. Every time you see Bangladesh being flooded, that's happening a lot more frequently because of climate change. We have there's a dire situation evolving here. Mm-hmm. And so where we can go to the Mekong Delta and we can operate with, around about 0.25% of the water to create the same dollar as rice, it's very, very valuable. And we can grow crops because of our temperature control, because of our system. We can grow crops that nobody else can grow in that region. Mm-hmm. So we're now operating in a particular province here, which is it's certainly one of the top two most affected provinces in Vietnam. And, there's what we're doing there is very, very special, mm-hmm. because that's making communities resilient to climate change. And, you know, there's a lot of technology, a lot of ideas floating around about how to mitigate climate change and net zero and all the rest of the stuff. But at the end of the day, climate change adaptation, there are communities that are suffering on a daily basis. And the world will never see, I think, the likes of what's coming in terms of climate change refugees. And unfortunately, most people in Australia have absolutely no idea about this.
That's
like absolutely no idea.
That's quite an alarming statement about the, you know, climate change refugees and the size of the problem. What can you give us some more detail on what you think that's going to look like?
Well,
displaced people from low-lying.
There's lots of displaced people, and we already know these problems exist because, for example, the Australian government, and I'm trying to avoid getting too political here, but you know, we know, you know, I sit on a lot of Mekong Delta groups, you know, where the problems are exposed, and we know that you know, when people don't have a job, what are they going to do, right? And so they turn to things which aren't necessarily helpful for society, but it's unfortunately because they've got to survive, okay? So, and it happens everywhere. You know, we're talking about drug trafficking, wildlife trafficking. The most, you know, revolting thing is human trafficking. And, you know, there's lots of that happens already with boats on the water from Indonesia to Australia. That problem hasn't even started. We just have not even seen, you can't conceptualize the size of the problem that's coming compared to what it is now. So, you know, but all of those problems, the Mekong Delta, and I'm not talking about Vietnam in particular, but the Mekong Delta is known as a, you know, the Golden Triangle, where a lot of the drugs come from. People need jobs, they need to make money, they need to feed themselves.
Yes. So
they end up doing things which are not necessarily, you know, good for society.
So what is your...
Climate change is accelerating that. What are these, you know, tens of millions of people who are poverty-stricken farmers in really, you know, low-lying areas that are going to be massively affected by climate change? What are these people going to do? So part of our mission, without us getting too grandiose about all our saving the world or something, I mean, we're just not like that, right? We just want to work and do our job. The awards are lovely, but what we really want to do is that's the kind of place where we want to make a difference. $1 to $4 per kilogram food, employing tens of thousands of people in vulnerable communities in the place that we love. Yeah. And, you know, that young woman who's on the screen, Nun, her parents are rice farmers in the Mekong Delta, and they didn't have a flood this year, okay? So, like, that's really serious. Yes. That's almost mind-boggling. You cannot comprehend that. Yes. So yeah, things are dangerous and they're difficult. So, you know, got to stand up and help with solutions.
Yeah, you mentioned people in Australia don't understand this. It's a you know, a world away from everyday Australians' lives. I understand Australian agricultural sector are quite supportive of your ventures in Vietnam, and so clearly I do also know that Australia's been quite supportive of the COVID situation and supplying vaccines and things to Vietnam. So there's a close relationship between the Australian and Vietnamese government. Do you see that these two governments could do more to help with this challenge in the region?
Yeah, I don't think that's up to me to say that. I think there's a fantastic thing that goes into Vietnam's favour, which is that they have 67 million people in an emerging middle class. Yes. Okay? That's a market, right? So money's coming. Yes. Right? Yeah. So you look at Myanmar and Bangladesh, they don't have the wealth of Vietnam, so it's unlikely that the private sector is going to play a contribution, and less likely, you know, they're less on the radar of money flowing around. I don't want to get into, we have incredible support and friendship with the Australian government. and one of the last consul generals, Julianne Cowley from Australia, she's incredible in terms of gender equality as well. So yeah, we're pretty proud to be part of a solution, and to have the support that we probably should have. The other thing which I think why we should be really active in climate change adaptation and helping these communities is, to me, COVID is really a result of climate change. And people don't understand this. And you can say, oh, no, it came from wherever it came from. But basically what it is that there are human beings interacting with species that they shouldn't interact with, okay? And as you start having communities going in and engaging in they've lost their job growing rice. They go and they think, oh, well, I can make some money trafficking wildlife. So they're interacting with species that they shouldn't. They're doing jobs that they really shouldn't. And, I've got a lot of really close knowledge with this kind of stuff. But, so basically that's just a frequency of interaction of that kind of thing happening. And as we have more societies that are more vulnerable, more communities, these kinds of things start to happen. There's a whole mixture of viruses and diseases, and that vulnerable people are going to be attached or, exposed to. It's going to come back to the community. So I would expect that COVID, let's prepare for another 3 or 4 of these in our lifetime. Maybe people say that I'm crazy, but I live here. Yes.
Interesting. I mean, the notion of the Thrive 2030 is that, or my theory is that, I remember as a new graduate coming out in the 1987 Wall Street crash. It was my very first job. And I remember the Friday lunches with clients were canned, and that used to be a really big part of the culture. Then, of course, a few years later, you get to Y2K. And there was a big global challenge around whether the computers were all going to fall over when it went from 1999 to 2000. So for at least 3 years in advance, everyone was, investing in that and focusing in on it, and consultants were selling the solution to it. And that was that was the global disruption of the moment. That was 2000. Then along comes 2008, GFC, another global disruption. 2020, COVID. Another global disruption. If you look at the pattern over those nearly 30 to 40 years, every 8 to 12 years there's a catastrophe. So Thrive 2030 anticipates that around about 2030 maybe another global disruption. So will it be another COVID, or will it be another GFC, or will it be a climate change catastrophe that we are not expecting? It'll be something. And so this notion about having these conversations to learn from what we've experienced in the last 2 years, rapid change, rapid pivoting and disruption. And people have done things in 3 weeks that they would say, would otherwise have taken them 3 years. And let's learn from that, and let's anticipate another dip in our growth curve is going to occur. And your anticipation is that we're going to have more major global pandemics, and it could very well be that. It could be.
And I mean, let's hope that with the advances in vaccine technology or in isolation protocols, in emergency medicine, if we've learnt in terms of, let's hope that all of that stuff ensures us against human suffering.
Yeah.
But at the same time, look at why that is occurring and just stop it there.
Yeah.
Let's actually think, and this is a really big, having been in this industry for a long time, there's a lot of money that goes to sexy, net zero pledges and to all the rest of it. The really unsexy stuff is actually making vulnerable communities less vulnerable, right? And that's what we do, and that's just hard work. It's lovely to win awards for it, absolutely.
Yeah.
We love it for our people, and these are people who, they've had hard lives. I think I can think about some of our people. So for us to win awards for them is just like, wow, we're actually appreciated.
Yeah.
But for us, it's all about, 50%, the United Nations, COP26, they think we're going to have to spend $100 billion per annum on climate change mitigation and adaptation. And some of the big investment banks think it's going to have to be 1.1 billion. I honestly think, that's all talking, that's just a drop in the ocean.
Uh-huh.
And if you think about how many trillions of dollars we've lost in the past 2 years with COVID, we need to get some work to get vulnerable communities less vulnerable. Otherwise, these big checks for COVID-like shocks are we're just going to keep writing them.
Yeah.
And, and who pays for that? I don't think that we'll ever pay it back. Whoever we owe money to, I'm not sure. It all just seems to move around. But we owe you money. Oh, no, we owe you more money. Oh, whatever. Yeah. But
on that point of COP26, which you've just mentioned, in terms of greenhouse gases and emissions, the agricultural sector, along with the building sector, roads and rail, these are the two big sectors that are creating a lot of the problems. And your business is helping to mitigate that because you're trying to produce clean and green food. However, I'm just wondering if we could get your opinion about the COP26 conversation and the outcomes of that. Do you think it went far enough? Do you think that the goals are going to be met? And if they are, is that going to be enough in a shorter period of time? What's your feeling about how COP26 has left us?
I feel that we're definitely not doing enough. And I don't, I'm a fourth generation coal miner. Okay, so my views are there's policy at one level, and that's, made by governments that are voted in by individuals. And, we're stuck with, or we get what we're given, I guess, or what we vote for. But as an individual, I certainly don't think, the world's doing enough. And I think that it's going to be that we're going to pay for it for a long, long time. And it may be that we've never ever, I can actually see a point that we don't ever solve the problem, actually. And that's a catastrophe. But what will happen is the polarization of the haves and the have-nots will become so incredible that the disruption to society and, I guess, tragedy and war and all sorts of things, it's just going to become this ongoing kind of chaos. And I remember 20 years ago, and we were saying, these things. I remember, I was doing a lot of greenhouse gas consulting, but before that, there were these notions of, there will be wars that will be fought over water in our lifetime. And we're sitting here in Vietnam, and, the Chinese are building massive hydrological dams, and that water that would normally flow through the Mekong, that would normally, go through Nun's family's rice farm, that doesn't happen anymore, right? It all happens in controlled releases because they want to make energy. Therefore, they become the energy superpower, right? And meanwhile, all the downstream people have got no food. So, and if you think about it, I know I'm going on about here, but it's really important. If you think about it, Australia can't even get their Murray-Darling Basin policy, where Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia share water.
Yes.
How is it going to happen that between 4 different countries, right, that they come up with this with a solution? And so the idea of fighting a war over water is, it's happening now in places along the Mekong. I can see it. And you look at, what's happening right there today with Putin and gas. I'm sure the Russians are feeling very, very vulnerable about the fact that climate change, all these pledges are being made, and who are they going to sell the gas to, and I've read a fantastic article on about that last night. Things are happening that people don't actually see yet are a result of climate change. And I think, but it's going to, I don't know that we'll ever wake up to it. I don't. Yeah. I think it'll just be this incremental, like the frog's in the water and it's boiling and it's getting hotter and hotter and hotter and the frog doesn't realise. And then it's like, holy shit, it's boiling. And then...
Yes. Those are very interesting notions that we will never get there, because I think, having these targets that came out of the COP conference for 2030, 2050, and then India has set some goals for 2070, there is this expectation that if you've got a goal and it's in writing and it's part of the United Nations, conference, that, we are going to be able to tick these things off. I think the challenge is, we get distracted with day-to-day things like COVID, like Ukraine, like, world debt, like, some of the other major challenges that are going on around, different regions of the world. And it's hard to keep focused on those bigger issues like environment, unless you're at the coalface, unless you're a grower, unless you're a coal miner, unless you're in those industries or a beef producer. However, we are seeing the effects and the impacts of it everywhere, every day. And I'm just wondering whether the next global catastrophe that I mentioned before might be climate. Something might happen that we haven't anticipated. We're seeing, the rising water, oceans. We are seeing, the increase in floods. We're seeing the increase in fires. And all of these things are said to be part of this process of global warming. I'm wondering, whether we're going to have one major catastrophe that's just going to make the whole world wake up like COVID did and say, oh my gosh, we have to... I
don't think that that's going to happen. I think everything is incremental. If people haven't woken up to those bushfires, if people have not woken up with that kind of thing, they're never going to wake up, right? And the effect of climate change is that everybody's balance sheet is just going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And people don't understand that. But it's, we've got to pay for firebombing for the bushfires. Well, how are we going to pay for that? That's money that could have gone to health and education, right? Mm-hmm. That could have been building the assets. But instead, you've got to go and pay for this thing that's called, airplanes and fuel and water bombers. Okay, so all of these things, you're just losing this asset base all the time at having to pay for these emergency things, to eventually you've got to take on so much debt to pay for all of these emergency things. And this is when and then these things that have traditionally been the assets, the resource bases of countries, which are gas and oil reserves, are suddenly worth nothing or diminishing amounts, Venezuela, and all of a sudden then there's a political, and so all of these things are just going on. And if I know so much, I could just look at these so many questions or so many problems and go, this is how that's related to climate change.
Yes.
Well, really? People would be going, you're a lunatic. And I'd be like, no, well, actually, this is the genesis of this cash flow problem.
Yes.
And this is what I see. And I talk to a lot of people that climate change is a cash flow problem. And then they start to go, really? But you look at a small farmer, right, or a farmer in Australia, and they've taken on debt because they've got drought. In a small farmer, they produce 10 watermelons every day, and they take it to the market and they get paid. All of a sudden, they don't have a month's worth of cash flow. They're actually, they're in a very vulnerable position because they don't have any savings. They don't, and so these things I just look at and I just all the time. Climate change is the cash flow problem.
Yes.
It's the world's cash flow problem.
And look, I think there's some really big issues there that we could explore more, but I'd like to ask you about your new role, Chief Impact Officer. Clearly you have, you're the founder, you've established this business and you handed over your CEO role to your most senior operator, which is a great thing to do when your business is at that point where you say to yourself, okay, it's running smoothly. I can hand the reins over to someone else to do that. So I can do what I do best, which is, think about the big issues. And your title, Chief Impact Officer, suggests that you've got some big things coming up.
Well, I think the first thing to clarify there is that the business isn't running smoothly and I thought I could hand it over.
That was an assumption on my part.
You're in an emerging economy with an unskilled workforce and with probably the world's most advanced technology, and it's with trucks, with a logistic issue, every single thing is chaos. It's 24 hours chaos, okay? And so let's get real. So I hand it over to Jackie O'Hara, who is possibly the most competent, determined, courageous and generous person who I could have met, apart from my wife, who ticks all those boxes actually. And she's the chief horticulturalist. But Jackie O'Hara exactly is our CEO, and her job is we're now getting to the point where we are talking to banks about tens to, $100 million worth of work, and major global banks, World Bank, etc. And in order to do that, you have to have a business that's so solid. And so Jackie's job, I just felt that rather than thinking now is the time when I feel I've done the job and I've got to hand it over and, I'm so generous, it's actually Jackie's just a much better person at doing that. Okay. And I just thought I have to actually, if we're going to make it to that stage, I have to get Jackie to do that.
Okay.
So, and we've got an incredible bunch of people around us who help us as well.
Yeah.
But as for Chief Impact Officer, somebody in my position would normally, I guess, go to Chief Technology Officer. It's pretty boring. And, but for us, what I always saw was that the technology drives the impact. Okay. If we can continue to have zero greenhouse gas emissions and have zero residues, that's impact. That's real impact.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. And I think this says something to, so I'm always doing technology work, etc. But my biggest passion is human beings. And I think the ultimate use of technology, and I don't know if you've seen a video, there's a video about Orla and it's got my voiceover and it says, the ultimate use of all our technology is transforming lives. And so there's lots of technology that comes around and it's just because we can make this thing happen faster, or we can make this light brighter, or we can do this or whatever. But truly, what lives are you affecting? And this technology actually impacts lives.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm Chief Impact Officer. And there's now about 5-6 governments that are supporting us and working, and big banks, etc. We're working on climate change adaptation solutions. And it's serious, like we're doing it. Like this is, it's really important to emphasize this. We are doing it, you know.
Yes. So those countries and banks that are supporting you, that are investing in you, who are, I suppose you can't say who they are, but if you could just enlighten us, what are they expecting to get out of this relationship? What's their investment? And it's obviously not just financial, but what are they trying to achieve?
Well, it goes back to COP26, and, the world thinks calculations are that we have to start putting up into $100 billion into climate change adaptation and mitigation solutions. That money is not going to come as $100 million in donations from governments, right? So it's very much about what we work with here with our Dutch Fund for Climate Development, and we focus on blended finance, where you take climate change adaptation solutions can be very, very risky, okay? So you end up with a little, like an equity player working with a debt agreement, and then you build assets and you can finance assets, and you come up with this, some people have an appetite for higher risk and they're likely to be equity investors. Some big multilateral, banks, they may want to take a position with some equity and some debt, okay? You've got to pay the money back. Everybody wants their money, right? But if in the process you are providing a solution to help them achieve these goals of climate change adaptation, then that is seen as a good investment for them. And then if in the process, in that trade, for example, we're working with a lot of very large United States technology companies. So if during that process we're creating an export revenue stream for them, they're likely to come in and help finance that venture. But once again, it's not a donation. Nobody gives you money, right? But out of climate change adaptation solutions, I wouldn't, you know, we're seen as one of the best possible solutions that's available right now.
At the moment.
Well, I don't want to go claiming too much but, you know, the other thing, the reason that we're here 5 years later on after the hell that we've been through is we're pretty hard workers and we just want to put our head down and do the work. And, you know, we don't really care. We're pretty humble about it. I
think you're doing more than that. You're doing more than the work. You're definitely making an impact. And honestly, it's been a real pleasure. Your story is so interesting, and it's a short journey. You know, you started in 2015. Is that when you went up to Vietnam? You know, you've achieved a lot in a short time frame, and the recognition that you've had, what you've built there, and the passion behind it, and the commitment behind it. Is a real accolade, and I'm thrilled to have had this opportunity to hear your story, but also some of your insights about, you know, the challenges that we need to face as a world and as a people. There's a lot more to think about there. So thanks for stimulating some thoughts that hadn't quite come to mind before. It's been wonderful talking with you. We'll obviously need to catch up again because we've barely touched the surface of the topic, have we? But so Dr. Lyndal Hugo, I have to ask you one last question, which is, if you found yourself in the future being promoted to Chief Executive of the world with all the challenges that the world has to face.
This is the craziest question I've ever had.
Yes, I'm sorry I didn't alert you to it, but it is my last question. And I'm just wondering, if you were the Chief Executive of the world with all these problems that we need to face, what would you put on the table for discussion in that first 100 days? What would be the priority for you?
Lifting people out of poverty to increase global GDP through accelerated adaptation to climate change.
Big topic. Yeah. So the next part of the question is, well, how would you go about it?
You can't ask me anything after that. But seriously, if you lived, and I actually want to say this actually because it's a very good question, and I have got some of the smartest people in the world. Sorry?
It was a good answer too, by the way.
I firmly believe that we do have some of the smartest people in the world that work for us. They've just never been given an opportunity. So there's a lot of old money in the world, and I don't want to, you know, I'm not making a statement about that. Yeah. But sometimes it seeks to make more money for itself, and there's a part that people are increasingly waking up to, in that all of the chaos in the world might actually be avoided, and people might have better lives if there was a bit more sharing and caring. And I truly believe in that, and that's why we're here.
Yes, yeah. Great thinking. A truly wonderful answer that's going to inspire lots of people to think more deeply about those big challenges that you're going to take on when you become the Chief Executive of the world. So thank you, Dr. Lyndal Hugo, for your time today. And I wish you and your team all the best with Orla, because it really is a very inspiring story that you have made such amazing accomplishments in such a short time frame in a really challenging part of the world. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you. And I look forward to having as many tourists up in Vietnam, going to wonderful Vietnamese restaurants and tasting all our products. And, you know, doing what they can to help us come out of COVID as well.
Fantastic. Great. Let's make sure we push that one for you. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and you know, all the best to you and your team at Orla.
Thank you very much. Okay. Bye-bye.